Hello everyone and welcome to Chess5, and today I'm going to show you the game between Caruana Fabiano versus Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, and this is the game from the Grand Chess 2 Superbet Chess Classic Romania 2021, and this is the round number 7, and there is a clash between Shakhriyar Mamedyarov versus Caruana Fabiano. As I am recording this video after the tournament was held, so all those who doesn't know who was the champion of the tournament, I must tell them the champion was Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. So it would be a pleasure to see his game, and it's Shakhriyar Mamedyarov versus Caruana Fabiano, which is world number 2 currently. So it is a pleasure to watch this game. So without any further ado, let's dive into the game. So Caruana Fabiano with the white pieces and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov with the black pieces. I have took BlackElo on our side, so it would be much nice to watch his Shakhriyar Mamedyarov game. So Caruana Fabiano with the white pieces started with 1 e4, and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov replied with e5, knight to f3, knight to c6, and bishop to b5, and we have the Roy Lopez on the board. So Shakhriyar Mamedyarov simply develops the piece knight to f6, here d3, bishop to c5, developing the pieces, here knight to c3, knight to d4. Here black can also go castle, perhaps g6, perhaps a6, but Shakhriyar Mamedyarov decided to play knight to d4 and saying, okay, I'm going to capture your bishop on b5 because it is very powerful. So Caruana played bishop to a4, taking the bishop back to a4. So Shakhriyar Mamedyarov played c6. The idea of playing c6 is now black is having choice to play b5 or even d5 to play in the future to take control of the center. So after c6, Caruana played castle and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov played d6. All those who all are wondering why he didn't go d5 directly, the plan of playing d6 is now Shakhriyar will develop his pieces castle, rook e8, and finally when he is all planned to play d5, then he will launch a very powerful attack by playing d5. So it's a strategy to first play d6. So after d6, Caruana played knight into d4 and here bishop into d4, and Caruana played h3. The idea of playing h3 is now there are no some bishop g4 threats. So after h3, Mamedyarov played a very shocking move and very powerful move, which is g5, a very strong move, and this move is very uncommon because blacks usually go perhaps castle in this position or perhaps b5, perhaps a5, but he decided to go g5, a very committal move. The plan of his move is that he's saying that he wants to win this game at any cost, and he's going to launch a very deadly attack by playing rook g8, h5, and g4. It's going to be a very dangerous attack by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov. So let's see how Caruana respond to this powerful move g5. In the game, knight to e2 was played. All those who are wondering why bishop can't capture the pawn on g5, I must tell them a very powerful move is coming, which is rook to g8. And the idea of rook to g8 is now the file of the g file is very open and it's going to be a very deadly attack. So the best move for white in this position is to play bishop to h4 because the rook was attacking the bishop, and now comes bishop into h3, a very powerful move. The pawn cannot grab the bishop because the pawn is pinned on g2, and it's going to be a very deadly attack. And all those who all are wondering why white can't play h4, yeah, because the bishop is also protecting the pawn is also protecting the bishop. Here black plays h6, attacking the bishop on g5. So bishop captures the pawn because it is forced, and now black plays bishop to g4, attacking the queen. So queen to d2. Here comes knight to h7, and the idea is black is going to put his queen on h4 by grabbing the pawn on h4, and is going to do a very serious attack by doing long castle. Yeah, so obviously a human would be afraid. So after g5, Caruana decided to go knight to e2, a human reply, because by playing g5 we can know that Shakhriyar Mamedyarov is going to either long castle or going to put his king in the center. So for now, a best reply for white is to open up the center by playing c3 d4. That's why Caruana decided to go knight to e2 by playing. The plan is to play c3 d4 and try to open up the center. So after knight to e2, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov played bishop to b6 back, because the bishop on b6 is very powerful, controlling full diagonal. So after bishop to b6, Caruana played c3, sticking to his plan by playing d4 in the future and going to open up the center. So Mamedyarov played rook g8, and now Caruana played d4, opening up the center, and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov simply captures the pawn on e4 with the knight. So Caruana played bishop to c2, attacking the knight on e4. So at the place of moving the knight, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov simply pushes the pawn to d5. Here bishop captures the knight, pawn captures the bishop, and pawn captures the pawn. Queen takes, rook takes. And after there was queen trade on the board, I think Caruana would be in a great relief, because the side which usually attacks, like for now black is attacking the white king. So once the queen joins into the attack, it's going to be a very deadly attack for white. So it's better for Caruana to trade off the queens. So after queen trade, black played g4, opening up the position, trying to open up the position. So Caruana restricted the position opening by playing h4, and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov simply pushes the pawn to g3. And your f pawn cannot capture the g pawn because the bishop is pinning up the pawn. So the knight can't capture the pawn on g3 because the rook will simply capture the knight on g3, and the f pawn cannot capture the rook because the pawn is pinned. So after g3, white played knight to d4. Bishop e3 is also a fine move, but okay, knight to d4. Here bishop to d8, planning to capture the h4 pawn. So Caruana simply captures the g3 pawn now. Rook into g3, rook to e1, planning to capture the e4 pawn. First, at the place of capturing the pawn, Mamedyarov simply pulls the rook back to g4 and protecting the e4 pawn. So Caruana played bishop to g5, saying, do you want to trade the bishops? So Mamedyarov traded the bishops and played king to e7. And the idea of playing king to e7 is, now Mamedyarov wants to develop the bishop and wants to put his a rook to g5 and going to capture the pawn on g5 and going to do very deadly attack on the king. So after king to e7, Caruana played rook a to d1, and now we can see that Caruana has successfully brought all pieces into the game. So after rook a d1, Mamedyarov played bishop to d7. Here e6 by Caruana, and here f into e6. The idea of playing e6 is because after f into e6 we can see it's a very bad pawn chain. It's like two pawns are in a row, so it's a little bit bad for black. So after f into e6, Caruana played g6 because all this pawn is going to die, so it's better to play g6. Here h into g6, here knight to b3. The idea is perhaps to play knight to c4, knight to c5, attacking the bishop as well as the pawn on e4. So here Mamedyarov simply pushes the pawn to e5. Here we have knight to a5. The idea is now Mamedyarov wants to play knight to c4, creating some threats on e5 pawn as well as taking control of the d6 square. So Mamedyarov simply plays bishop to e6, taking all the squares from the knight. Here Caruana played rook to d2. The idea of rook to d2 is, if Caruana goes for capturing the b7 pawn, then simply comes rook to b8. Here if knight have to go back to a5, here comes rook into b2, and here we can see it's going to be a very bad attack by the black rooks, and I think white king is going to be checkmated. So that's why at the place of capturing the b7 pawn, Caruana first played rook to d2, protecting the b2 pawn, and now threatening to capture the b7 pawn. So Mamedyarov played rook to b8, first protecting the b7 pawn. Here we had b4, trying to gain some space on the queen side. Here black played king to f6. Here a4. Here rook to g3 and planning to capture the c3 pawn. Here we had rook into e4, which was a mistake by Caruana. The best move in this position for white is to play rook to f2 check. So the best move for black in this position is to play bishop to f5, rook into e4, and here rook into c3, and here comes g4, and the bishop is going to die. That why rook into c3 is not the correct move. But white is having a fine position, although black is better in this position. But it's a playable position for white. But what happened in the game, after at the place of rook f2, he directly captured the pawn. Here comes bishop to d5 first, attacking the rook on e4. So white plays rook to h4. Here black captures the c3 pawn. And white plays rook to h7. The idea is now white is planning to capture the b7 pawn. And here Mamedyarov simply pushes the pawn to b6. And if you look closely, the knight is trapped on a5. He is not having a single square to go. And that's the point of playing at the place of rook into e4. That's the point after rook f2 check, bishop f5, rook into e4. The knight is having the c4 square for the knight is having the c4 square because the rook is protecting the c4 square. So it could be a good move, but after b6 the knight is trapped. So knight into c6 was played. Here bishop into c6, rook to c7, rook to c1 check, king to f2, rook to f8, b5. All those who doesn't know, this is completely winning position for black, as black is a bishop as well as a pawn plus. So it's completely winning position for black. But okay, Caruana is still trying to play. So after b5, black played king to e6 check, king to g3, rook to c3 check, king to h2, rook to h8 check. Here comes rook to g1, king to g1, and now comes this fantastic move by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, which is rook to h1 check. And this is a very fantastic move played by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, because here white is not having anything left. He have to capture the rook. And now comes the fantastic move by Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, which is bishop into g2. Very fantastic move, because here white have to capture the bishop. And here after rook into c7, we can see after rook into g6 check, king to d5, black is the pawn up and he's going to win the game. The idea that after king g1, black gave a check to white king by playing rook to h1 check is because the bishop is pinned on c6 and the bishop can't move from the c6 square. If the bishop moves from the c6 square, then the rook is hanging on c3. So it's better to give a check. And bishop into g2, very fantastic move. Rook trade, there was a rook trade. Here after rook captures the g6 pawn, king goes to d5. Here white pushes the pawn to a5. Here king to c5, a into b6, a into b6, rook to e6, king captures the b5 pawn, and Caruana captures the e5 pawn with a check, rook c5, and here rook e1. Here rook can't capture the rook because after b into c5, it's completely winning position for black. So rook to e1 was played, and after rook to g5, in this position, after move number 48, Caruana Fabiano with the white pieces resigned the game, and Shakhriyar Mamedyarov with the black pieces won the game. So it was a fantastic game played by both the players, but in the end, Shakhriyar Mamedyarov, which was the Grand Chess 2 champion, took the game by playing rook to h1. It is a fantastic move. If every one of you like this game, then please like to my video. If you are new to my channel, then please subscribe to my channel. Thank you for watching and bye bye.